So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a classic. This is going to be another replay on TOL FALAS. Always going to be one of my favourite maps, this, just because of the potential that it often has. Eclipse, of course, made some alterations to TOL FALAS, or at least a variant of it, where you could also pass through these mountains, which I do think improved TOL FALAS quite a little bit. This is the older version, however, where the only ways in are going to be through this little village here in the middle, and across the bridges over on the far left-hand side of the map as well. But it is going to be a 5v3, it is going to be good versus evil, at least as far as I'm aware, and yeah, this should be rather interesting. It's also a long battle, as TOL FALAS often turns out to be. The defenders have got a lot of good places they can dig in on, and it's also layered. It's not as if they only have to hold one position indefinitely. They can move around a little bit as well. We shall see how they decide to try and handle the evil forces that are on the attack today as well. But here in the far back corner, we don't get to see this part of the map very often, to be fair. There's the disco parties going on the mainland, which is kind of an odd glitch. It's not just on TOL FALAS, but it seems to be most prevalent here. Those neon lights in the background. But we have Sandra Gowron, who is going to be playing as one of, I think, two, possibly three, actually, Umbar armies that are on the field today. Makes sense that Umbar are going to be invading TOL FALAS. They are the closest ones to TOL FALAS that are under Sauron's sway, that also have the ability to actually sail to the island itself. So naturally they would have been responsible for the fleet and carrying the other armies across as well. Corsair Blackguards are going to be here, a good unit to bring, because those javelins can really put the hurting down on even a really strong front line. You know, armour, melee defense values and the like don't save you against this kind of javelin unit. So if they do get up close and personal, they can do a lot of damage to that front line. And when all's said and done, they can actually chip in melee as well, as we have seen recently. Over here we've got some Bellagai Archers, definitely a good choice. Umbar with their heavier archers, their focus around a longer skirmish with their bowmen can really help them in an offensive siege like this. It can make them an invaluable part of any evil attacking team, or any evil defending team for the opposite reason. Alcarondas Legion are here, heavy infantry as well, is something Umbar of course do fantastically well. Gives them that solidity that the attackers can lack if they go full orc, or maybe go... You know, there's a few other evil men factions that of course don't have the same level of heavy infantry that Umbar do, and you know, the quality can make a big difference, especially when you have quality in depth like Umbar do, because not only do they have the Alcarondas Legion, but also the Bellagai Shield Bearers, maybe not quite as impressive, especially not without the armour upgrade, but they are armour piercing at the very least, which is useful against a plethora of good aligned factions, especially the Western Kingdoms of Men. Bellagai footmen are a cheap option for spears. Cavalry is not unheard of on this map, so they could also be useful for that, but for the most part they're going to be here for just a cheap frontline unit that takes a decent amount of time dying. Narun Aru Sentinels are a fantastic unit of pikes. If they're committed late on, they could be a real problem for the defenders as well if they don't have any ranged tools or something of superior quality to deal with them, though there aren't many units that could tackle the Narun Aru Sentinels head on and be victorious convincingly. The Narun Aru Royal Guard are of course a fantastic unit of heavy archers as well, even more impressive than any other heavy archer Umbar has at skirmishing for a long period of time, but they're very expensive. You can't really mass them up in the same way you can with the Balakith Marksmen. More Alcarondas Legion, Balakith Axe Guard, which are more impressive at dealing damage than the Shield Bearers. Certainly they trade in their shield for higher damage and charge values. And finally at the back here, some Harbingers of Castamere, the bodyguard infantry unit that Umbar have available to them. Heavy swordsmen, good quality heavy swordsmen at that. Castamere are going to be rolling with them. The second army is under the command of the player who sent me this battle replay, who is Overlord. It's worth saying this replay is actually fairly old at this point. I had to dig through the archives to find this one, but I did in the end. Also playing as Umbar though, so we'll go through his army a little bit more quickly, because he too has some Alcarondas Legion and some Balakith Axe Guard, rather similar formation, in fact almost an identical formation you could say, at least with the infantry at the back here, with Narun Aru Royal Guard, Alcarondas Legion, Bellagai Archers at the front, his archers positioned nicely, Corsair Blackguards. He's gone for some Ardenheim Shield Guard, which are a heavy unit of expensive but useful spears. These Black Numenorian units for Umbar basically don't rout. They don't do as much damage perhaps as the equivalent regular infantry units would, but their defensive capabilities are very impressive. And Umbar's ability to keep themselves alive with their quality is going to be one of the primary things that they bring to the table here for the attackers. Sentinels, Shield Guard, more Alcarondas Legion and Axe Guard, and he too has got his general, unsurprisingly, in a unit of Harbingers of Castamere. Now, we have a Haradrim army under the command of Mebulus 99. Some dismounted Serpent Guard. Seems to be a bit of a running theme that I always mention how good the Serpent Guard are, even if they're not quite as good as something like the Alcarondas Legion. As far as line infantry goes, they're kind of in the same sort of bracket as stuff like the Mountain Uruk Host or Uruk-hai infantry. They achieve that quality through different means. They have slightly lower armour than other line infantry units of this cost would have. They do have slightly better melee defense as a result. It's a real trade-off. Personally, I do prefer the armour and shield value for a line infantry unit because it helps them be more robust against missiles. But it's just a trade-off that Harad have to deal with. Armour isn't really their specialty anyway, and it's not as if they're as vulnerable as many of the other Haradrim units anyway. They don't have the armour upgrade to make that even more the case, but it is what it is. Southron Warband are a good choice, lower tier spears, similar vein to the Bellagai footmen are for Umbar, only the Southron Warband have that Harad way of looking at things with lighter armour, definitely more fragile, but that little armour piercing edge they have is a very useful facet to their game. Got some Muhard Beast Hunters over here. Javelins are the thing that Umbar can bring to the table as well, and they can do so in a more nuanced fashion, or at least a more varied fashion than Umbar can with their Blackguards. The Beast Hunters are the bread and butter javelins that Harad have. They also pull out a mace in melee, which gives them a surprising amount of depth, but they are a very fragile unit. Timing is going to be everything, as always, with javelins like this. Southron Archers, once again, Harad are going to be engaging in the skirmish fight in a very different manner to Umbar. Their armour and just general survivability cannot match up to their allies, but they are very cheap, the Southron Archers, so they're going to try to be efficient with this. Trollmen, you don't really see Harad not bring the Trollmen. Everyone will always bring the Trollmen for Harad because you'd be silly not to, really. Multiple HP, armour piercing and melee, everything you would want. Yes, their armour values are quite poor, or non-existent, really. But they do have a shield, which is surprising considering they are shock infantry at heart. And yeah, there's really no reason not to bring them. They're excellent for what they offer. And the Champions of Nafrat are of course the beefed up version, although they're a little bit more in line with what you would expect from a bodyguard unit anyway. Other armour piercing bodyguards such as the Witch-Arm Hammer Guard are not too dissimilar to the Champions of Nafrat, but it gives Harad even more of that good armour piercing that they so crave. More Serpent Guard, and back here some more Muhard Beast Hunters and Trollmen of Harad. Interesting to see what Harad do. Their lighter armour can make them a little bit more exposed in a siege, and there is another Haradrim army over there, which I think we will go through right now actually, and we'll go back to Mordor in just a second. This is Cletati. He's gone for a little bit more of a numerous infantry force by the looks of things, especially with regards to these Muhard warriors, which we've mentioned in the past. A very numerous unit of line infantry, similar vein to something like the Rudar swordsmen, only a few more warriors there are than swordsmen, which is interesting. Their shield value is actually not that bad, but of course where they do fall down is the fact their armour values are very poor, which for the same reason as I mentioned in the Serpent Guard can be a bit of a sticking point when it comes to line infantry, because you want them to be robust in an attack like this, but numbers are a form of robustness as well after all. Muhard Berserkers back here as well, a bit of cheap AP, cheap Axemen. The Orcs have this sort of thing with the Orc Maulers, the Orc Fellas. The Muhard Berserkers are certainly not all that dissimilar to that kind of unit. Yeah, they're going to get ripped apart by arrows if you commit them too early, but that armour piercing could be really, really useful. A standard unit of Serpent Guard, you can see here the difference between the upgraded version and the standard version. I quite like the standard version in their own way, to be fair, but here we have the Black Serpents, the upgraded variant, and this does mitigate that lower armour value that the Serpent Guard have in comparison to other units of line infantry from other kingdoms. Haradrim Spearmen, Muhard Beast Tamers, so a Phalanx unit and a very entry-level unit of spears. Demons of the Desert, who's surprised to see them? Absolutely no one. We've seen them used very effectively the last few times we've seen them actually, which is a bit of a rarity. Very often the Demons of the Desert are dealt with quite well by the team that's opposing them, because unlike stuff like the Witchers or the Iron Watch, one volley or two isn't really enough to get the best out of them. You need to utilise them several times in a row, and by the time you see your own units go flying, you're going to target down the Demons of the Desert with everything you have. More Beast Hunters, more Southron Archers, and of course Trollmen at the back, standard Trollmen, and Champions of Nafrat. And last but certainly not least, we have Pedro, who is playing as Mordor. Another match with Pedro in it, good to see it. This is a little bit older though, so I wouldn't be surprised if actually he's still learning the ropes at this point in time. He's got some Temple Guard over there, his armor-piercing archers, needs to link them up with the rest of his army as quickly as possible. Orc fodder, basically free, not quite completely free anymore, but you very rarely will see Mordor go without the Orc fodder because they're so cheap. Some Moran on archers here, bit of a skirmish battle that they want to engage in. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, these Great Shield infantry units, so useful for the attackers if you have a Mordor or Angmar army present. If you use them at the right time, the defenders can really struggle to deal with the kind of pushes that they traffic in. Couple of units of Sauron's Will as well. Nice spike of armour piercing that Mordor can bring to the table. They're a very well faceted faction, Mordor, if you bring a balanced army. A Troll Catapult, which I like this inclusion, having a bit of artillery on the attack in a map like this, where there are bridges and lots of choke points, and even terrain that perhaps favours the attacker's artillery. In some areas, if the defenders are careless, then it's good to have that sort of thing at your disposal. Orc Javelins, cheap Javelins, but nonetheless very effective, as we've seen several times in the past. Heavy Spears in the Minas Morgul Chosen. The Troll Drummers, of course, are not really functional at this point in time, but they still look cool. And finally, the upgraded Temple Executioners and the Nazgûl. Very, very scary units for Mordor indeed. Now, let's go across the bridges and talk about the defenders, starting off with Lindon, played by Son of the Dunedain. We don't see Lindon all that often because they're quite a difficult faction to play as. Their light armour can make it difficult to utilise them effectively. Having said that, the Noldorin units are the one area of Lindon where they do not have to deal with that sort of thing, much more akin to the kind of thing their brethren over in Imladris traffic in, this heavily armoured Noldor infantry. And honestly, they might be one of my favourite looking units in the game, they and the Blade Masters. I just really like the armour, like the colour scheme as well. They are going to be here, large and in charge, but they're going to need some support, otherwise they could end up getting overwhelmed completely. There is going to be a bit of cavalry. Considering it is Lindon, Lindon's cavalry is limited in the amount you can bring it, but it's still very, very good in terms of the quality. The Horse Lords of Ulmo first and foremost, of course, because they are arguably the best unit of knights in the game if you're planning on being really aggressive with them. Need to be careful of arrow fire, of course, as with most things Lindon, because of their low armour. Ballista here in the gap, so that's going to be really nasty on those bridges if they can lay down that punishment effectively. Chariots as well. It's very rare you see Chariots on the defence. We'll see how well Son of the Dunedain can utilise them. Mithlon Nobles. Their Javelins are very deadly as well, but they are very expensive, and ultimately Chariots are a flash-in-the-pan kind of unit. Can the defenders really afford a luxury like this? It all depends on how well Son of the Dunedain can use them, really. Mithlon Marines and Forlindon Marines, two hybrid units. First and foremost they are Javelins, but then they are Line Infantry and Spearmen, respectively. More cavalry as well, Harlindon Riders. This is quite an unorthodox Lindon defence because so much of their strength is bound up in their fast-moving mounted units. If Son of the Dunedain doesn't use them properly, this could be a long battle for the defenders, where they are constantly staring down the barrel of defeat. We shall have to wait and see. Something else Lindon do very nicely, however, is pikemen, and in a situation where the attackers have to move into their front lines, that's where their pikes are at their best. On a normal field battle, Lindon can struggle a little bit there because you can't count on the enemy not simply skirmishing you down first of all, which can be pretty deadly for them. I would imagine up here as well, yes indeed, we've got some archer companies. We've got 2 units of Forlindon Archers, 2 units of Harlindon Guard, the lighter and slightly heavier by Lindon standards Archer as well. Spears and shields as their secondary weapon. I would imagine the Wardens of Elos Tyrian are lurking around here somewhere as well. It would be folly to leave them out of such an encounter. Then we have Dol Amroth, played by X-Plane, playing more or less on home turf. Again, much in the same way as Umbar as far as the good forces of Middle-earth go that defend this place. Dol Amroth are the closest ones with the navy required to get there. Well, it depends really how you look at it, I suppose. Gondor as well could also be in close proximity. Perithil Champions, fear-causing heavy swordsmen, could be really, really good, especially against the low and mid-tier units that the enemy have to offer. They could really mulch their way through them. FALAS Marines, with defensive positions, the defending Javelins are going to have a slightly easier time of getting the shots they want off than the attacking ones, but the attackers will have more at their disposal that they're willing to lose. Tirathea Marksmen, heavier archers, which they will need to be on the top of their game if they're going to be going up against numerous archer forces like Harad's and heavy archer forces like Umbar's. More horse archers as well, Perithil Riders. I'm interested to see how the defenders utilise all of these units of horse archers. Thalon Halberdiers, Tarnostian Spears, we've got plenty of Thalon Men-at-Arms with the armour upgrades in here as well. Dismounted Knights, the Silver Swan to shore things up. And also some Black Swan Renegades. Wanderers of Nimrodel, unsurprising to see more defending rangers. I think actually they've got a damage value of 6. I might be wrong about that, but It's just a gut feeling I have. I believe that is the case. The Thalon Halberdiers, Mortir Marksmen, the mighty Haven Guard, of course, another really strong heavy swordsman. We've seen plenty of them on the field today. The Noldoran Blade Masters, probably another unit we ended up missing, to be fair. Second unit of Haven Guard, so going heavy in for them, but Dol Amroth are all about their heavy swordsmen after all. And then last, but by no means least, we do have Imladris, played by Modexa, so the High Elves very much coming to the aid here of Dol Amroth, who have a bit of elven blood in them themselves. Another unit of Elven Knights is on the field today as well, the Gwythi Rockdor, who in my opinion are the most well-rounded unit of Knights in the game. They don't have quite the same armour and shield value combined score that something like the Knights of Numinous have. They don't have quite the same speed and aggressive tendencies as the Horse Lords of Ulmo have, but they're the best blend of everything, I think. And Imladris, if they can utilise them well, we shall have to wait and see. I mean, the defenders, or the attackers rather, don't have their own cavalry to really hunt this down. It's going to be a hard task to utilise it properly, I think, for Modexa, but he has every chance to. Upgraded Imladris Guardians with Imladris Sentries is a terrifying front line to behold. Imladris with their heavy armour and their melee skill can be such a difficult foe to break down if the battle is allowed to be dictated by the elves. We've also got the Gwythi Artham, one of the tankiest units of spears in the game. Very tough to wear down. Not the fastest at dealing damage, as I always say whenever I see them. Just it bears repeating, just because they're elves they don't do damage as quickly or as well as they can actually withstand punishment. That goes for other Imladris units, such as, well, the Broinin Riverwards, but especially the Gwythi Myrdain with their, or Gwythi Myrdain with their Warhammers, or the Zebras, as certain people took to calling them long ago. God Halim are also here with their Silverthorn arrows. Norotino warriors, which I actually approve of, because if it comes down to skirmishes being in melee late on, which determines the battle, the Norotino warriors are better prepared than the standard archers of Rivendell, even if the archers of Rivendell are the superior choice if it's purely about ranged focused plays. Runway spearmen are in here as well, fantastic frontline unit because of how much damage they can take once again. Runway archers, all of the Runway are here, including the Blade Masters, their telltale golden armour in full effect, and they could have a couple of other units in there as well. Swords of Rivendell are there, for example, but it's hard to tell when their armies are all bunched up like this. But I'll make a little bit of a cut here. I would imagine the cavalry might be the first things to start moving. We'll have to wait and see how the defenders want to use their cav, whether they want to use it early or whether they want to keep it back for later. The second of those options might be superior actually, but Lindon may not be able to wait with how much of their force they've actually, how much of their money they've ploughed into that cavalry force, but we shall have to wait and see, won't we? I shall make a little cut, and we shall rejoin when the battle is getting underway. Well, this is a rather risky move from Son of the Dunedain to use his ballista in such a fashion, just skimming over the top of the heads of his Dol Amrothian allies. It does look as though he managed to bisect some of the orcs crossing the bridge, however, but it is only orc fodder from Pajo, and it does look as though this is going to be the first encounter on the field today. There is also going to be, however, a bit of cavalry action going on over here. The Gwythi Rockdor from Modexa being used aggressively, and rightly so actually, because the champions of Nafrat and the Serpent Guard are both exposed, and a nice swift charge from the Gwythi Rockdor could be just the sort of thing, especially against the champions of Nafrat, such a strong unit that could prove to be a real problem for them later on, and the High Elven Knights with a really good opportunity here to do a bit of damage. Bit of a shame the Dol Amroth cavalry is not moving in support of them, to be honest with you, because this might be the one and only time they have the opportunity to use their cavalry to supreme effectiveness in the early game. Tarnostian spearmen are going to be holding the bridges against the orc fodder. An easy victory for the Tarnostians this. They're not the most damaging unit of spears in the world, but they will be able to overcome the orc fodder, especially with the fact that the orc fodder doesn't really have any support anywhere nearby. This unit of orc fodder, meanwhile, continues to get absolutely roasted by the ballista, but that's enough really from the ballista. They don't really need to go too heavy onto this unit of orc fodder. There's also the Parathil riders that are shooting in just in behind there, the horse archers trying to do their thing. Like I said at the outset of the battle, I wasn't really sure how useful the horse archers would be. Harassment units for the defenders in this sort of situation are maybe not the way to go, but they're going to be able to thin out this unit of orc fodder and make them very, very easy prey indeed for any infantry units that come forward. Well, some of these orc fodders have actually been able to get in and around to the rear side of the unit, but it's not going to help them. The Dol Amroth defender is going to be too strong for them. The Gwythi Rockdor, who have taken a few losses, but that makes a bit of sense as Hashari and Javelins present when you charge into a Haradrim line. But it was still worth the attempt. Mordor Chosen moving across to block the charge that would have been forthcoming onto the Corsair Blackguards. And this is where having no mounted units as the attackers could prove to be a little bit of a problem, because it does mean you have to constantly be one step ahead of your opponent to block that cavalry. There is that unit of Temple Guard, which, if the Gwaithir Rokdor sees it, Pedro has moved his Temple Guard up onto that bit of high ground over there, but they're horribly exposed. If they're seen, the Gwaithir Rokdor could charge into them. They will have to go through the armour-piercing arrows to get there. Now, going into the Naruna Aru Royal Guard, I mean, if the charge does land, it will be fairly devastating, but they could find themselves surrounded here, and the Naruna Aru Royal Guard with their spears in melee, the Mordor Chosen obviously dedicated spearmen. Gwaithir Rokdor will need to get out there. Not a terribly devastating charge, but also they didn't lose any riders either, so they will take that. Medexa needs to keep this pressure up with his cavalry. If he does, his team are in a pretty good place moving forward, I would suggest. And yeah, the Orc Fodder ultimately do rout another unit of Orc Fodder being pushed across the bridges as well, but they need to send forward more than just these really basic units, because this is just free kills for the Dol Amroth infantry and horse archers that are waiting for them over on this side of the bridge. They have succeeded in drawing the Athalon Halberdiers of Explain forward a little bit more, however, and that will allow the Mordor archers to get a little bit of value off against the unshielded halberds. The Athalon Halberdiers are pretty good as halberdiers go, indeed. Dol Amroth do not lack for a decent phalanx. Meanwhile, over here, the attack still hasn't fully got underway from Umbar and the two Haradrim armies that are coming over here. Interesting setup for the defence as well. It does look as though they're not actually going to stick around over here indefinitely in the same manner. I'm actually going to try and hold two different choke points, perhaps take advantage of that little gap over there where the Harland Guard have set up shop. There's Harland Riders up on top of this hill as well, so Lindon with a bit of range support, a few pikes over here as well, but mostly once again it's Dol Amroth using their infantry first and foremost, Lindon moving across with some now, but the elves holding perhaps back more in reserve than the men at this point in time. What have we up here? Tirithea marksmen who are on fire at will. That is a big mistake. They need to be they need to not be doing that, because they're going after Orc Fodder, which is routing, and that is the last thing you want to be seeing. You need to be using all of your arrows to maximum effectiveness in a 5v3. Now, the Ballista doing its thing, going after a good target. The Ardenheim Shield Guard are definitely a worthy foe, grilling a few of them. And they will need to thin them out a little bit more if they intend to just use the basic Dol Amroth units to bring them down in melee. Otherwise they will need something a little bit more serious. Well, that was a really good shot from the Ballista actually. One of them goes short, but one of them goes through the entire unit. And over here, the arrows continue to fire. And actually, as more of the Orc Fodder dies, they are getting a better and better shot on the Halberdiers. So these men of Dol Amroth will be wanting to retreat as soon as they possibly can. The Orc Fodder routing and broken as they flee. Now the Ardenheim Shield Guard also making contact with the enemy. They're going to want to turn that Ballista off now, because they're far more likely to get friendly fire on the Tarnostian Spearmen. Tirithea marksmen up on the hills also firing down into this unit. Ardenheim Shield Guard, of course, with nice shields and very nice armour. Going to be less of a concern for them, but this is a lot of pressure for one unit to withstand. They're going to need more than just these individual units crossing these bridges, as I said. Even though it's definitely a step up from the Orc Fodder, they're still without a lot of support. Arrows flying in from both sides now. Mordor pushing forwards, trying to support this unit of Umbar and spears. Now moving back over to the other side, you can see a huge Umbar push is going to be moving forward. Missiles are firing. Wardens of Elos Tyrion up on the high ground. Elven Rangers, 2 units of Wardens of Elos Tyrion actually, and this is the perfect time to use it. I mean, that is a huge blob, so you may as well try and use as many of these body piercing arrows as you possibly can. Elven Rangers, of course, have got that extra point of damage, which can make a huge difference. It can multiply the amount of damage you can do by a substantial amount. And these are serious defensive lines. 2 units of Noldorin Guard with a unit of Mithlon Pikemen, some Imladris infantry units as well making their presence felt. Imladris Archers move forward to get Imladris Spears. I can see what they're trying to do here. This, on paper, looks like a poor idea, just sending a single unit of upgraded men-at-arms into this huge army, but what they're obviously trying to do is hold up their progress for a bit longer, let the Rangers and other units of archers do their thing for as long as possible on this blob. And you see here Norotino warriors also firing in. Standard archers this, so certainly not as devastating, but just getting as many arrows into this attack as you can is going to be the key here for the defenders. No warriors continuing to fire. They're going to try and get some range support of their own in there. Are they routing? Well, they're looking like they're wavering. Balakith Axguard, however, look at that. There's only 22 of them remaining, and none of those kills would have come at the hands of the men-at-arms, really. So the archers definitely having a big impact. There's another unit of men-at-arms over here, which is just going to hold the progress up once again. There's some Hashari in here, which are looking a little bit more healthy than the Balakith Axguard. Umbar and Harad fighting side by side. I do like the upgrades on the TOL Amroth units. They're relatively basic as far as their function goes, but all they need to do at this point is hold the line and allow the Elven arrows to do their thing. Muhard Berserkers trying to get through there, looking very thin on the ground now as well. And even just to look at this force, it looks less intimidating than it once did. To the point actually where you might want to ease up on the arrows a little bit and only use a few of your units of archers and wait for another big push. Meanwhile, over on this bridge, Blackguard of Barad-dûr pushing forward. Not really the right time to be using the Great Shield Infantry. You want to be using that in a bigger fight, which is a little bit more decisive for how the battle's going to be going. Pushing them forward on their own doesn't really net you anything, because you're not really going to be gaining any ground, and even if you manage to push through the enemy lines, you're not going to have any infantry to take advantage of that nearby. And also with dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan here, they're really going to expose the fact that units like this aren't that great in sustained melee combat. So TOL Amroth will be able to bring this unit of Great Shield Infantry down. Umbar actually doing a little bit better. Ardenheim Shield Guard being joined by a unit of Alcarondas Legion now, and they're going to be able to overcome the Tarnostian Spearmen without too many issues. Still more arrows coming in here, but Umbar well placed to deal with that sort of pressure, as I said. And there's no defenders now guarding the middle bridge either, so it's a good opportunity for Umbar to press the attack on that position as well. Maybe try and cut off this force from TOL Amroth here. It'd be nice to bring down a unit of Silver Swan Knights for them. But that window probably will end up closing. I mean, Horse Lords of Ulmo are over here, and they could start cycle charging in. Talked about how dangerous they can be. But for the moment, they are static. And this might have something to do with the fact that Lindon may also be busy managing their units over here. Indeed, they have done a good job at that. They've pulled back the unit of Athalon Men-at-Arms. Now, Hashari trying to pull back, Balakith Axguard damaged. I mean, this is a pretty substantial attack as well from Sandra Gowron. Alcarondas Legion attacking into this Imladris front line, but you would back Imladris here. Elder Runway Spearmen backed up by Imladris sentries. There's also a unit of Athalon Halberdiers from TOL Amroth there, should the need arise, for a bit of an armour-piercing edge as well. A very nice defensive position indeed, but Umbar, of course, no pushovers. Probably one of the few factions that wouldn't be completely daunted by a pure infantry fight with Imladris. And here you can see Alcarondas Legion, and they are ultimately going to cut off these dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. That is a bit of a loss for TOL Amroth. In the end, this has probably been a worthwhile venture from the attackers. They've lost plenty of orc fodder, a whole unit of Great Shield Infantry as well, and a few elements of the Umbar force have fallen as well, but I think they will probably feel as though they've gotten what they wanted here, and TOL Amroth will be disappointed to lose such a useful unit of infantry this early. Bellagai Archers moving forward, pulling out their short swords. Be interesting to see how the defenders approach this. It's not a completely typical TOL Amroth or defence of TOL FALAS this. A little bit more fluid. Elder Runway Archers firing in now, so Imladris have got some of their archers over here as well to try and add a little bit more damage to break through that Umbar armour. But so far, they'll be quite pleased. A bit of friendly fire coming in there from back across the bridges. Need to be a little bit careful there, do Mordor. The Godhelm are there as well with their Silverthorn arrows. Wanderers of Nimrodel, what are they firing at? Again, you really need to be going after worthwhile targets with Rangers, and that is not Bellagai Archers. That kind of decision making can be fairly terminal for the defenders because it does tend to add up. Over here, meanwhile, I'm sure that the Wardens of Elos Tyrian have racked up an impressive kill count for themselves at this point in time. Well, this unit of Athalon Men-at-Arms, there's only so much longer they're going to be able to hold back this force. Muhard Warriors and Berserkers going to be able to overrun their defence sooner rather than later. But, of course, their purpose here was merely to buy time for the arrows to do their thing. There goes a general, and it must be the Umbar general over here. Umbar not as susceptible to morale shocks as Mordor or Harad would be, so not such a terrible thing in the long run. But still, it's always a bit of a bad sign. It's a sign that one player is committing forward a lot of resources, so Umbar really need to try and make this stick, but Imladris still fighting hard and managing to hold on for the time being. Umbar have added their own pikes to the front line now, though, Naru and Aru Sentinels, so perhaps a little bit more in terms of numbers will be needed. Norotino warriors on the front line, good in melee of course for an archer, but only 25 of them remain, and that clear projectiles would lead me to believe, yes indeed, Hashari Stalkers, so Harad trying to give the defenders a bit of their own medicine here by using rangers to good effect. Clatati there, but I don't know, he certainly doesn't have the same angle of attack. You can see though, they've definitely ripped through those Norotino warriors. They sense a bit of blood in the water though, clearly the attackers, because they're continuing to send forward more. Trollmen added to the front line will be a concern even for Imladris. And now they're also going to push in over here with some Southrons and some Muhards, but this is going to be nasty for them with Noldor in guard and Mithlond pikemen also. 4 Lindon Archers able to shoot at fairly close range as well against the lightly armoured Haradrim. This is going to be fairly devastating too. Not great for them. Do they have plenty of reinforcements, more archers, more marines, Noldor in guard? They might want to start using those javelins actually, if they intend to use them as makeshift infantry as well when things get a little bit more desperate, which inevitably they will. Serpent Guard moving forward to try and add a little bit more quality. Umbar continuing to pressure. Wythi Myrdain on the way up as well. Well, going into the settlements itself now, some Corsair Blackguards going to try and poke away at these Dol Amroth defences. Again, trying to split the attackers a little bit, send them down different streets. This is probably going to be it's going to be a lot for Dol Amroth to try and keep track of. I do wonder if they're going to be up to the task. Now you can see the javelins finding their marks. Artillery streaking across the sky as well. What are they going after? The God Halim, I would assume. With an unfortunate hit there onto what I think are Rangers. Even there, they remain invisible even though they're burning. That's dedication for you. I would assume it's the God Halim they're going after though. Ooh, so close to the general there. That would be an interesting loss to sustain. Again, Imladris's morale not too poor though, so they should be fine. Wythi Rockdoor taking a bit more damage, potentially going to try and move in, but they're ready for a cavalry push. Meanwhile, still projectiles flying backwards and forwards. A very robust infantry engagement this from both sides as well. Generally speaking, in 5v3s the attackers are able to withstand this sort of thing for much longer than the defenders, but given the quality of the defenders here, based around high elves, that may not be the case this time. Roynin River Wards joining in on this Lindon defence. Trollmen of Harad being pushed forward along with the Serpent Guard to perhaps try and crack through the Noldor in guard. Javelins being used in support as well from the Muhard Beast Hunters. This is really good play from Harad. Attacking in exactly the right way. Javelins also attacking back here. There's Gwythi Myrdain and Haven Guard yet to be committed. More Roynin River Wards as well. Perhaps some Athalon's men at arms would not go amiss, but still you can see here this Dol Amroth and Imladris defence remains solid for the time being. Wythi Rockdoor now right in and amongst things down here on the riverbank. What are they going to be going after? Champions of Nefrat again perhaps? Dismounted Serpent Guard? Trying to go after him there, and they are going to charge in here. I mean, there's only so much that 9 of them are going to be able to accomplish, but they can be an annoyance back here and maybe even go up here and get some rear charges on the forces which are attacking the front lines. Maybe try and rout them. Serpent's Fangs are in the way, however. Lances come down. Some of those Serpent's Fangs will fall away as a result. This is good play from the cavalry here. Need to be careful about staying in melee with something like the Serpent's Fangs, though they do have a bit of bite to them. Shari Stalkers. Shall keep an eye on what happens there. Meanwhile, Tirithea Marksman getting into place to presumably push back the Corsair Blackguards. Corsair Blackguards don't have the most javelins though, they may very well have used up their ammunition already, given the fact they've got their short swords out. Runway Archers trying to skirmish back and forth a little bit. Some dead riders on the floor there. Chariots marksmen in and amongst the now depleted unit of halberdiers. Chariots marksmen out of ammunition clearly, pulling out their swords and just trying to get in the way now, act as a shield. Looks like all of that ammunition. I said earlier, we saw Chariots marksmen wasting their ammunition. Could prove to be decisive there, allowing Mordor a little bit more of a skirmish period, softened old Amroth up a little bit for the main event. Meanwhile, truly the main event is happening over here to try and conquer this hill. More projectiles. We've had Beast Hunters and Naran Royal Guard trying to help their infantry force push through here, which they will now need. That unit of Athalon Man-at-Arms and more importantly the Haven Guard have been committed to this front line to try and keep things ticking over for the defenders. And over here as well, Wardens of Elos Tyrion out of ammunition but pulling out their two swords and joining in with their brethren on the front line. The Broynin River Wards also doing the same. The Northern Guard may have been spent, but the Trollmen as a result will have taken damage. So Harad are going to need to commit more and more to try and get through here. Ooh, javelins raining down from on high. Good position there for the Fall Lindon Marines, a really good position in fact, and that will be enough to do yet more damage to the beleaguered attackers. With Long Marines. Balance of forces is evenly matched. The Alcarondas Legion. Eventually, the combination of Haradrim numbers and the heavy infantry from Umbar you would feel would be enough to overwhelm the defenders, but they've managed to hold on so far. There's still Elder Runway Spearmen on the front line. They were the first ones into the fray, and there's still 43 of them remaining. It goes to show how good they really are at holding the line. Meanwhile, again pushing forward Bellagai Archers. Infantry now clashing. The halberdiers and the marksmen being engaged by some heavy Umbar spears and some blackguards. The fight for the defenders has gone pretty well on the other side of the battlefield, but over here you would have to say the attackers have been in the ascendancy most of the way through it. That bodes ill for the defenders, because if this defence starts to fall apart, it's going to be hard to keep track of everything. Hard to put out all of these fires, so to speak. Still, that artillery is trying to hit the units that are on top of the hill. Their marksmen. So Black Swan Renegades, I mean, Dol Amroth still have good quality over here, but do they have enough? With Umbar and Mordor having the wind in their sails now. Meanwhile, over here, Swords of Rivendell moving forward, a basic unit of Elven Line Infantry, but it's still more combatants that the attackers will have to try and push their way through. Trollmen doing their thing. And yeah, this has been very, very bloody, this fight for the attackers. Excuse me. More Haradrim being pushed forward. Just having to commit more and more to just try and keep this assault going. After all, if it completely falls apart, that's a really bad sign for the attackers at this point in the battle. Muhard, Southrons, throwing everything in to try and get the defenders to relent. So far you'd have to say the defenders have done really, really well to hold on to these lines. They've used their missiles as well. Like that's, I think when it comes to building a defensive line, just a static position of infantry, it's not too difficult as long as you know to put a shielded defensive infantry at the front, have a phalanx in there, commit units when you see it start to falter. Not the hardest thing in the world to do, but one thing that defenders very often misjudge is how and when to use their ammunition from their ranged units. So far, I think they've done a pretty good job at that. Fall Lindon Archers up here on the top now, taking the position of the javelins that were there. They're not just dumping all their ammunition unthinkingly. The God Helem are over here now. Fall Lindon Archers doing their thing. This is where Lindon could be exposed a little bit though. There are some arrows finding their way back into them. And of course Lindon's armour value is not brilliant. Is he using fire arrows? He is, so he's going to try and break them now. He sees an opportunity to try and get this force to rout. Try and push outwards with the Horse Swords of Ulmo as well. So an interesting idea this from Son of the Dunedain. Trying to combine his cavalry pushing out with a rout from the enemy, but I don't know, I mean there's champions of Nathrat here, you're not going to rout them. You might be able to route everything else with this sort of pressure, but not the champions, and there's more units on the way. So yeah, I'd switch back to regular shot at this point. It was a nice idea, but Harad with more units on the way, and it has kind of worked. Some units are running. Most interesting. I think that was more because the attackers actually pulled their units off the front line more than them actually routing. The warband routed, but the Serpent Guard didn't, nor did the champions of Neferat. That's a little bit bemusing. The attackers actually blinking first, as it were. Now then, what have we here? Parathil champions meeting the Minas Morgul Chosen in combat on the streets. And the Minas Morgul Chosen are already depleted. So are the Parathil champions, to be honest, but the heavy swordsmen will have the edge in this fight. Dol Amroth going to fall back to a more defensive position as the Orc Javelins get in position to try and support. Bellagai Archers still firing. Parathil Riders are over here now. More reinforcements have arrived, but it's out of ammo Archers, the Elder Runway Archers, trying to help the beleaguered Dol Amroth forces over here hold on to this choke point. Are they going to be able to do so? Looks like there is a bit of routing going on. The Athalan Halberdiers finally succumbing to the pressure that the Javelins and the melee fight has foisted upon them. Over here, Black Swan Renegades pushing forward with the Parathil champions now in response to the Alcarondas Legion of Umbar moving forward. But all of this does mean they are getting into range of those Orc Javelins. Pejo is trying to use to good effect. Not the best shot for the Orc Javelins to try and deal with, but it's better than nothing. And certainly the Black Swan Renegades will be a good target to go after. That armor piercing will be very handy against the Umbar and Mordor infantry that is over there. Now then, this fight over here. Do the attackers show any signs of finally overcoming this defence? You'd have to say the answer is no. In fact, the defensive line over here is pushing back against the attackers at this point. Nara and Iru Sentinels are still a unit of quality on the front line, but the rest of it is looking like out of ammo skirmishers. Southrons, Corsair Blackguards, not the sort of thing which is going to be able to withstand Elder Runway or Haven Guard. This is looking like a more substantial attack now, but it's still just stopped dead in its tracks. Those Imladris sentries are going to be such a difficult thing to try and break down, along with those Lindon pikes. Wardens of Elos Tyrion going to be adding a good amount of melee defense to the front line as well. It's looking pretty grim for the attackers, actually. They're not making the progress they need to. A few arrows sailing overhead, some of them hitting their mark. Again, more javelins coming in, most of them hitting Hashari. For Lindon Marines, again, good ammunition management being showcased by Lindon throughout this battle. More so on this side as well. I mean, we saw obviously Dol Amroth wasting a bit of ammo over on the other side for the defenders, but so far that hasn't proved to be too much of a problem. FALAS Marines in place. Now then, over here. Bit more of an organised push this now. Some Bellagai Archers trying to move in support. And numbers-wise, this might be enough now to overwhelm the Black Swan Renegades that are blocking their path. There isn't that many Parathil champions remaining after. You can see the Troll Drummers in the background there. Some Tirithea Marksmen joining the fray, but only 20 of them. This is a little bit more serious now. Gwaith Yarthand and Haven Guard being committed to the fight to halt the attacking momentum. Also upgraded Imladris Guardians, FALAS Marines here in force. Much more like it. And the attackers certainly not going to have it all their own way now, and indeed Orc Javelins are going to get absolutely butchered in a fight like this. They're going to need something much more substantial to be able to win through this. Bit of a juddery frame rate in this battle now, but I suppose in a 5v3 on such a big settlement it's sort of to be expected, but the defenders managing to shore things up for now over there as well. What will the attackers do? Once again, we see on TOL FALAS the attackers not want to use these bridges, even just a couple of units to draw off a little bit of attention may very well have been. I know that bridges are not the best thing to try and use in Medieval 2, but on this occasion I think it would have been worthwhile for Lindon Archers now back in position again, taking the position of the Javelins. There are the Noldorin Blade Masters, ready and waiting, alongside some Swords of Rivendell, Groin and River Wars. Those three infantry units might be the last that the defenders have to commit over here now, but that may also be all they need. Javelins in position. We've got Beast Hunters doing their thing. A lot of these elves and men are now bloodied significantly. But they've bled the enemy far more. Southron Archers, they are trying their best to return fire into that Lindon firing position on top of the cliff, but they themselves are not exactly the last word in terms of survivability. And they are taking damage now.
They have lost half their men.
A bit further forward. Berserkers trying to push in, but yeah, it's obvious at this point they don't have the quality nor the mass to be able to push their way through a very well prepared elven pike block such as this. A few fire arrows coming in. There's no real point for the attackers to use fire arrows in this situation. I could definitely understand why Lindon attempted it, and it kind of worked. But there's no way you rout Lindon and Imladris defensive position, which is in the ascendancy. What you're doing is running your own ammo supply dry. Indeed, it may actually prove to be even more detrimental than that, because if you hit your own men, you're more likely to rout the Haradrim fighting on the front line. Sauron's Will pushing forward now, some dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan moving up in support of the Black Swan Renegades. Belfast Marines trying to get in position to utilise their javelins, and they are doing so. Sauron's Will moving in to also support the Naru Naaru Sentinels, which may be a bit of a concern for these defenders over here, because all of this quality that Imladris and TOL Amroth have committed forward can be held at arm's length to a certain extent by those Umbar pikemen. Javelins are here, of course, have Blackguards, Naru Naaru Royal Guard. Still a lot going on over here. Wanderers of Nimrodale pulling out their swords, 45 of them going to join the fray. There are some Belfast Marines as well. What do the attackers have left over here? It doesn't look like a... They've got Troll Catapult, more Alcarondas Legion, Harbingers, Balakith Axe Guard. I don't know, I mean, it's not a massively impressive force. It might be just enough to win over here, but is it going to be enough to carry the fight forwards? I don't know. They still, of course, have access to their Chariots, Lindon, which could be a breakout unit for them. Those Javelins could be very useful. Timing going to be everything there, of course. Broynin Riverwards moving forward now with the Swords of Rivendell. Some upgraded Serpent Guard from Clatati making their way to the front line now. Still refusing to give up over here. Harad. Not many of these are going to be returning home to see the southern deserts again, you would imagine. Been a very bruising encounter for the men of the south. But those Javelins have done a decent job there. They have actually whittled down that front line. The defenders may be getting a bit too far ahead of themselves, exposing themselves more to the attacking skirmishers, which can often be a bit of a serious error. Meanwhile, still over here, the Muhard's basic Haradrim Spearmen, and now what is being committed forward certainly not going to be enough. Some more Javelins coming in. So, I mean, for all of the damage Harad have taken, they have done their best to use their archers and their javelins to decent effect. And that's all you can really ask, given the really grisly position they were trying to deal with. Now, perhaps... Nope, they're routing units. I thought then, based on the minimap, we could be seeing a few attacking units attempt to use the bridges. But no. Still Lindon Archers. God Helene firing in as well. Demons of the Desert being spotted back there, clearly. Definitely a good target to be going after. You don't want them to be having their way with you. Champions of Nathrat wouldn't be a bad target either, because they are a problem. But with all these pikes, you could risk trying to allow them to wear themselves out on the phalanx. More Muhards coming forward. Just sheer numbers at this point could be the answer. These Broynin River Wards just trying to overwhelm them here. Those arrows find their way in here, though. They'll rip through the Muhards pretty quickly. There's still Southron Archers. The Demon of the Desert, they can see him in the distance getting shot. A well-placed arrow indeed, as most elves are capable of. Meanwhile, Smash Knights of Silverswan, the Nazgul are in here now. Putting a little bit more pressure on the defences now with the attackers. Again, the Nazgul, I mean, these dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, they are a good unit, but they're going to need a little bit more if they're going to fight Nazgul that are backed up by all of these Axemen as well. Definitely not the fight they would want. Adonai's Shadowbows trying to do their thing. What are they actually firing at, though? Not the easiest unit of rangers to deal with because of that higher armour value. Going after Runway Swordmasters moving in. I mean, that is a significant unit to commit, but Is that going to be enough on its own? Bellagai Archers being added to the front line by Umbar. They might have just about enough here to carry this fight into the late game here, the attackers. Imladris Guardians. The victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle.
The enemy are badly blooded. They have lost half their men.
Wythy Arthur and Haven Guard, I mean, they're going to win over here, but they could end up getting cut off if the attackers commit forward more over there. A unit of Alcarondas Legion just to stoke the fires a little bit more. Don't know why, but it's over here where the frame rate is worse for whatever reason. Now then, still got those chariots. Those chariots could cross the bridge. Imladris starting to pull back, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall at this point. They may need to go back. Noldorin Blade Masters, Lindon Guard. Yeah, they are. They're going to retreat now. Leave a rear guard. Hope that the units that they've left on the front line can do a little bit more damage. But for Lindon Archers, unlikely to do so against champions of Nafarad.
We have lost half of our men.
Have you indeed? This will be enough to hold them at bay for a little bit longer. It'll be this defence that falters first because they're a little bit more widespread. Still Imladris sentries though. There may only be 4 of them left, but it's a sign of how a well prepared Imladris front line can really last the distance. There's not a lot of attackers left over here though. I mean, if we have a look over here, what they have purely in reserve at this point, Southron Archers, Beast Hunters, they've already seen combat, both of them, so it's taken everything for the attackers to be able to push their way through here. Umbar is pretty much gone. Still a unit of Elder Runway Spearmen. That's a fresh unit though, but they are in full view of some Javelins and some Archers. They need to get out of there. Harad have got a few units left, a few units of Muhards, some Trollmen, some Serpent Guard. Actually a unit of Imladris Guardians moving forward as well. Demons of the Desert. Tempted to go after them perhaps? Catch them out in melee? I mean, to be fair, the defenders could still win the fight over here if they were to commit everything forward, but that would leave them potentially open to the assailants from the other side. Still, Lindon Marines getting into position. More Javelins could be forthcoming. Champions of Nafarad, still victory seems certain, but Pikes, Lords of Elostyrian have got high melee defense as well, so it's going to take them a while to mulch through all of this. Lindon Guard maybe changing their mind. This is going to be the final defensive position. Lindon Riders. And fair play. It's easier to pull back to there, and it's obvious that this is going to be the problem area for them. So it'll take the attackers a little bit longer to march through the settlement as a result. Wanderers of Nimrod are going to try and hold the Nazgul at bay, who, as of this moment in time, have any of them perished? No, is the answer. They'll be damaged, but none of them have fallen yet, which is a bad sign for the defenders. Wythy Arthur and Haven Guard continue to slowly push through here, but Umbar showing their survivability, their armour. Depleted unit, well, I'll say that. A section of that Blackguard unit getting some good javelin volleys off into this infantry blob. The attackers will get through there at some point, but it's how much the defenders can make them pay for that, because they do have a good opportunity going into the late game here, the defenders, to be victorious. Well, these Imladris Guardians, victory almost a certainty. Surrounded as they are by basic Muhards, showing off their superior quality here, the elves. And they are pushing back here against this position as well. What happened to the champions of Nafarad? They were moved over to the other section of the line to try and push through the thinner defence, but this does allow Lindon's skeleton crew over here to kill off more Southrons, wear down the attacking manpower. Still got Pikes over here as well. And say that there's only 4 champions of Nafarad remaining. I'd assume that Javelins must have had their part to play in that then. Umbar Warriors really struggling against this one unit of Imladris Guardians, although they will end up getting surrounded. You can see here they are shaken at this point. And that will be what ultimately finishes them off, the fact that they are a little bit out of position. Yes, indeed. Arrows zipping overhead, going after the Southron Archers. Not entirely necessary at this point. I mean, we've seen them use their skirmish ammunition to really good effect. But the Lindon Riders should probably be going after the Trollmen just because they've got low armour. Try and soften them up for later on, where you'll inevitably have to face them in melee again. All sorts of Umbar. What's happening with the Chariots? They're still going to be down here. Lindon Archers going back through the settlement. What do we have? Yeah, they've been victorious over here in the long run. The attackers, as was feared. Imladris Guardians being used as a rear guard over here. There goes a Haradrim general. Could be enough to force a rout. They have managed to save some units. So yeah, Haven Guard have managed to get out. Some Wanderers of Nimrodel as well. So they've managed to save a few more units for their final stand. But yes, they finally managed to do the business over here. Umbar and Mordor. There's some Imladris Guardians back to the wall. Now over here, more arrows. Just trying to push forward once again. What are they going after down here? Trying to kill off the archers once and for all. Serpent's Fangs. Beast Hunters moving forward. They may be going after the Demons of the Desert actually. Hounding them. Nice play that from Son of the Dunedain to recognise the danger, but is it going to be too brave and too bold? There's still Elder Runway Spearmen over here, although this was the second unit of Elder Runway Spears, so it's a little bit less impressive than the first, but then they were getting pounded by javelins, and there were plenty of Trollmen on the front line to challenge them this time. He also didn't have quite the same luxury of an organised pike block, but there are still pikes milling around as well. Could they be outright victorious over here, the defenders? That would be impressive. With the Chariots, they probably would be. Belfast Marines are routing. Those Mithril Nobles are still just hanging out. Lindon Riders continuing to fire in. You don't see this too often in a siege like this. Oof. Point blank. Those javelins doing their thing, standing and shooting. I mean, they can be so devastating, can the Demons of the Desert, so it's not too surprising to see the defenders try to bring them down, but even if they don't bring them down at this point, a lot of their ammunition will be spent, and it will purely be an above average melee combatant that they will have to deal with later on. Can't have too many complaints about that. Flatati's played this battle as well as he could as well. I think Harad in general over here, they've made the most of of the hand they were dealt, really. But in the end it wasn't quite enough, and the Elven quality has proven to be a significant stumbling block for them. They continue to go, and will the Serpent's Fangs be enough to give them victory alongside those Trollmen? Probably, but it's going to be at such a cost. Serpent's Fangs taking a bit of damage, but better positioned than pretty much any other Haradrim unit to withstand punishment such as that. So yeah, the attackers will be able to be victorious over here in the long run after that push forward to try and go after the Demons of the Desert. Could that be a mistake? Could that be the mistake in the long run? Seems harsh to say, because I actually like what he did, Son of the Dunedain, to try and bring the Demons of the Desert down, but we'll see. We shall see. Now then, Lindon Riders. They've got their spears out. What does this mean? Have they run out of ammunition? Are they going to purely be used to try and charge the enemy down? To still have cavalry in these numbers will be a little bit of a concern for the attackers. Are they going to go after the beleaguered Haradrim at this point, try and run them down, charge into them a little bit more, link up with the Mithril Nobles perhaps? What's going on over here? Alcarondas Legion, 2 of them. And now the Chariots make their move. We're going to follow these guys now, because I'm interested to see how Chariots on the defence will work. Whether they will be the sort of thing that can win the battle here for Lindon, or whether they will be a complete waste, and that 1,300 to 1,500 worth of gold could have been better spent on another high tier unit, which would be enough to see the defenders overline, or potentially would be enough to see them over the line anyway. What have we got going on up here? Calm before the storm now, as the attackers were victorious there. At this point, actually, we will go into times 6 speed just to wait, because it's just going to be interesting to see how the attackers deal with this now. Plenty of cavalry still available. Right, is this going to be the moment? Chariots again. In this sort of environment, they're so constricted that they could end, the momentum of the chariots could end up being bogged down so easily, which is why I'm still not convinced it's the best decision. Ballista bolts still being utilised. Saw that used in the early game, of course. Still being used now. I mean, they could try and use their javelins first, try and use them as horse archers first before trying to use them as a bludgeon, as chariots often are. Are they going to try and get into a defensive position and then charge down the hill as a last resort? That would be very Helm's Deep of them. And I'm there for it, actually. I quite like that idea. But it does mean we're going to be going back up to times 6 speed while the attackers get into position. No need for a cut, I don't think, as the rain continues to fall. Like I said, the weather, you imagine the weather in the south to be a little bit better, more consistently, but I suppose the coast will do that. Now, what have we here? Ah, here we go. The engagements will begin. God Helene being engaged in melee by Naruna Reforged, 2 units of heavy archers, which are well known for being also pretty good in melee. The God Helene more so, though. Naruna Reforged pulling out those spears. Imladris going to pull back into defensive position. Still got that ballista. I don't know how much ammunition it's necessarily got. It's been playing a bit part in this battle so far. Again, has the ballista been a worthwhile investment from Lindon? It's done damage, but has it done enough? Probably just about, but it hasn't overachieved either. Which, of course, artillery can do. God Helene moving forwards. Sauron's Will taking some javelins from the 4 Lindon Marines. Another example of Lindon's ranged units being used well, doing damage to the Sauron's Will and Alcarondas Legion as they trudge their way up the hill to try and dislodge the defenders from their final stand. Over here, they're going to have to get into melee as well, though. And 4 Lindon Marines, I mean, they can fight in melee, but they are ultimately light spears. Not really the sort of thing which is going to be good against the heavier units that Mordor and Umbar can bring to bear now. How much quality do they really have left? I mean, Mithlond Marines, decent. Noldorin Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters, I believe, are up here somewhere. Haven Guard, the Chariots. I mean, they do have quality. God Helene are up here, so this is within their grasp, the defenders. But can they reach out and take it? Or will the attackers break defender hearts once again, as we have seen time and time again, especially on this map, actually? Something like the Ardenheim Shadow Bow is exactly the sort of unit which can do this sort of thing. Especially against the more lightly armoured denizens of Lindon, those ranges are going to be pretty effective as we do move in now to the final 10,000 frames, very much into the final phase of the battle as well. There's nowhere else for the defenders to go. They either stand and die or stand and win. Javelins being used, and going to try and use the Blackguard of Barad-dûr here is Pejo. I mean, this is the right time to utilise them against the lightly armoured Lindon forces. Ooh, that could be really, really nasty. That catapult, if it gets a fortunate hit, that could be all she wrote for the defenders. If it bisects something like the Noldorin Blade Masters, that kind of strength, not the easiest thing to replace at all. Defeat seems certain for the Blackguard. They have taken a lot of losses at the hands of those javelins, but there's Umbar quality around them. And to grab a hold of their courage here, the foul warriors of Mordor. in come the Haven Guard, along with Mithlon Pikemen to try and shore things up. Again, I'm on ×2 speed because this is one of those fights that is going to be quite grindy from now until the end. The ballista still has ammunition, so it was actually a fortuitous hit from the catapult there. Where is the catapult? Oh, there it is. It's a troll catapult as well, so even when the catapult itself is gone, the crew is going to be somewhat useful and have a part to play in the late game. Mithlon Marines now have ammunition, but they are good makeshift line infantry, so they're going to join in on the front line and have their part to play as well. Lindon Riders. Still shadow bows, 52 of them. Getting some decent hits, I suppose. Troll drummers added to the mix. Again, they don't have that. Their morale effect is not working, but in the next patch it will be. So for now, all they are is relatively poor combat trolls, but at this point, every little helps for the attackers. Will they have enough to break the defenders down? I'm not sure they will, with the kind of qualities the defenders have left. Haven Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters in particular are very, very strong. There are Nazgûl still lurking around the place as well, but Noldorin Guard, Chariots, when the attackers start to really flag, those Chariots could actually be the sort of thing to be the final nail in the coffin. God Halim are actually pushing around the edge. They've taken a few losses, but they are going to prevent reinforcements from arriving to the front line, which means this initial assault may be completely destroyed. Of course, they have Blackguards and Bellagai Archers only, having to try and batten down the hatches. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Allegedly. Catapult trying to move maybe a little bit further forward, try and get a better attack. Temple Executioners, Harbingers of Castamere, so they've got their own quality here, the attackers. Very close battle this. One of the better sieges of TOL FALAS that I've shown off, certainly. I'm sure many people will be rooting for those elven defenders. And the ballista still being used. Trying to go after that blob down there. Go after something like the Temple Guard, whose armor-piercing arrows are now finding their marks, just trying to wear the defenders down as much as they possibly can. Oof, that was a good hit. Right through the middle there. Grilling one of the trolls as well, for good measure. Balakith, still some demons of the desert. If they still have ammunition, they could yet prove to be a very significant part of this battle as well. Naren and Iru Sentinels trying their best, but they've seen so much combat already. And now here comes possibly the biggest moment, really. Are the Noldorin units from Lindon going to be enough for them to really gain the edge in the melee fight? The Haven Guard already committed, but they're a little bit more depleted. The Nazgûl are here after all, but 6 of them now, so they are starting to take losses. I do like how the Haven Guard, they've got that sort of Grey Warden vibe from Dragon Age going on. Very nice. Temple Guard, of course, is still a significant threat to deal with in melee, as well as the armor-piercing arrows that they're bringing to bear now. But yeah, with the Harbingers of Castamere, the Nazgûl, and the Temple Executioners being committed, this is it. This is going to be the moment where someone ultimately wins and loses this fight. I think the defenders need to not be stingy. The Noldorin Blade Masters are needed on the line. Now is the time, really, especially with how the Temple Executioners are pushing their way around this line now. And the only thing that's in the way is a unit of Lindon Riders. The Elven defenders needed on the front line, but those arrows, while they are being looped over the line, they will still be, that damage will still be adding up. Horse Archers are trying to do their best to reciprocate that damage going the other way. And here come the Chariots. I mean, they definitely would be better off trying to use their javelins first before charging forward. Yeah, and that's exactly what they're going to try and do now. It's a good opportunity to do a lot of good damage this. And they are going to do so against the Temple Guard. And this really is it. It comes down to this. Both sides throwing everything they can at the enemy and seeing who will remain standing after these hits. There goes an Elven general. Possibly the Dol Amroth general, actually. Explain. Temple Guard and Temple Executioners. Surely at some point these Lindon riders will not be able to hold the line. There goes the Dol Amroth general. Imrahil falls. It's a bad sign. 2 defending generals falling in quick succession. Is all of this quality going to be too much? Oh, excuse me. Hay fever bites once again. Not for too much longer, hopefully. Hopefully we will be coming to the end of that nonsense. Catapults in the way, which could be getting in the way actually of the javelins. Demons of the Desert trying to move forward. Harbingers of Castamere victory seems certain. Yeah, I think the attacks have just got a little bit too much quality looking at all of this. I think as well the shape of the engagement favours the attackers. They're going to be able to wrap up the line here. The defenders have been a little bit too focused on one part of the line. These javelins need to find their way into the temple units that are starting to work up the line now, because those Mithlon pikemen are still a bit of a challenge. But I don't think Son of the Dunedain sees the threat that all of these temple units represent. And I think that might be all she wrote, and that might be an attacker victory being served up here. The defenders have done really well in this battle, especially given the unorthodox compositions. Quite a lot of cavalry. I would still argue that maybe having so many horse archers wasn't really the right call. I think for Dol Amroth, if you traded in the Parathil riders for something like the Arathirim, and then sent that out with the Gwythi Rockdoor early on, that could have proved to be a real nasty thing for the attackers to deal with, and that could have made the difference. Chariots are now moving in. They're going to try and do their thing. Going to move forward, but yeah, this is the problem with Chariots. They've got no room to get momentum up and keep rolling through the enemy lines. All they can really do is clumsily bump into the enemy. And this means they are ultimately going to be easy prey for Sauron's most faithful of servants. Catapults at close range. Noldorin Blade Masters will defeat Alcarondas Legion over on this side, but it's elsewhere on the line where the problems are going to arise, unfortunately, for what is now pretty much an exclusively Lindon defence. Imladris and Dol Amroth falling by the wayside earlier on in the fight, and yeah, it is going to be an attacker victory, unfortunately, which I'm sure will lead to many thumbs down on the video. People take it rather personally when Imladris lose a fight. But such is the way of things. Still trying to use their javelins. Not going to be enough. I mean, they're finally going after the temple units, but it's going to be too little too late for the Mithlond nobles, and the troll drummers are going after them as well. Nazgul attacking them. Now it's just a case of wearing Lindon down. It's been a good fight this though. Like I said, one of the better sieges of TOL FALAS that I've shown off. And it's one of the reasons why I like this map so much. Serpent's Fangs moving forward, only 6 of them remain. The Chariots being hounded. Lindon riders still with a bit of ammunition, but not going to be enough, and I think they just ran out of ammunition. In fact, their spears have been drawn. Elsewhere, more jabbies. And also some Noldorin Blade Masters still down here. Oh, excuse me, that hay fever still. Whenever you have your first sneeze of the day, as that was, you kind of feel it building. And it will be the Noldorin Blade Masters and the associated cavalry with Lindon that are going to be the last ones. I mean, they're going to put up a decent last stand here. Lasts longer than many other units would, but there you can see the bearded elf slicing his way through a Balakathak's guard, but it's going to be all over. Here come the Chariots, to be fair. Well, actually, those Chariots, I mean, surely not. Surely with the Temple Guard, the Harbingers of Castamere,
Our army is tiring.
Lindon riders, can they get some charges off? Temple Executioners Nazgul, I mean, you can see how deadly the Chariots can be when they can actually get up ahead of steam, but ultimately, just not quite enough. I mean, it does go to show fine margins. So if the defenders had just been, again, I think back to those Tirithea marksmen wasting their ammunition, like the kills they could have got with that, that could well have been the difference maker, honestly. Maybe not against units as high quality as this, but, well, there goes the bearded elf. Looks like he got run over. That wasn't what happened, of course. There goes one chariot. There's only one chariot remaining, and he's now in and amongst all those swordsmen. He falls eventually. A valiant last spit in the eye there from Lindon on the attackers, and there's really not many attackers left, and those that are for the most part, really elite units. Harbingers of Castamere, Temple Executioners and Temple Guard, a couple of Nazgul that still live as well. Yeah, 3 of them. They've been through the mill today, though, the Nazgul as well. The rain continues to fall, and I'm sure that's just how the evil servants of Sauron like it. Nice and dismal. And the final Blade Master facing off against 3. The Harbingers. There's also a Mordor banner carrier with his hatchet. Here we go. The true Black Moon, well, Sauron's Black Númenóreans rather than Castamere's are going to be the ones to try and claim glory, or maybe the Nazgul. Well, there he goes. Could have been any one of them in the end. They'll all claim it, I'm sure. Yes, indeed. Very much only by a sword's edge. Incredibly close. Around about 30 attackers left standing at the end-ish. And the defenders so close to victory. It was ultimately that fight over there on the bridges, Mordor and Umbar pushing through, where ultimately the defenders probably did lose it. A couple of decisions which maybe just weren't quite what they needed to be. Which is a shame, because I do think the defenders play very well, especially over on this side. The ammunition management from Lindon in particular was very impressive, and the front line building of Dol Amroth and Imladris was also very, very good. So close and yet so far. It goes to show what a challenge a 5v3 can really be. As for the kill counts, not too surprising to see Lindon get the most on the field by a fair distance. Those Wardens of Elos Tyrion would have contributed greatly to that. And for the most part, Lindon was an army that was based around its skirmishers, which in a map like this, in a situation like this, is going to net you more kills. Whereas Dol Amroth, and especially Imladris actually, were much more melee focused. They were the shield, where Lindon was the sword, metaphorically speaking. Let's see what did the damage, however, for the 2 Umbar armies. Overlord getting significantly more kills than his fellow, who well, actually one unit did get over 100 kills, the Corsair Blackguards. That's a good, efficient kill count for them, but the rest, obviously, it was always going to be a low amount of kills for the attackers, given the defenders who were who they were. And then Sandra Gowron, who had a bit of a torrid time, the first one in on that really well-crafted defence, and it really does show. Even Umbar's legendary heavy armour and shields, not enough to spare them from the fury that they were met with. The most amount of kills any one of their units got was 73, and again it was Corsair Blackguards, so the javelins showing themselves to be a really useful tool in this battle. So yeah, big thank you to Overlord for sending me this battle replay. It was quite a long time ago you sent me this, but it was shortly before I actually recorded a different TOL FALAS replay, so I do get there in the end. If you do send me a battle replay that I want to do, I will get round to it eventually. And big thank you to all of the players as well that were a part of this battle replay. As I've mentioned in the last few replays, looking for more replays at this point. I am, from my perspective, just about to go away on another trip, this one only for 2 weeks rather than 3 weeks, but even so it does mean that I will not be able to record while I'm gone. But hopefully by the time I get back I will have a couple more replays that I can get on with, because when I get back I will be going on, at least fairly close to the point where I return, I will be going on a week's break. I'll be heading back to my true home in the southwest of England for a little while, and I will have my recording stuff with me, I believe. So while I'm down there enjoying myself, I will be able to record a little bit more freely than I have been able to up here. So I should be able to build up a little bit more of a backlog for myself, so that I've recorded ahead in time a little bit more so. But I can only do that if I have the replays necessary for me to do so. So by the time this one comes out, I think that it will actually be during that week that I'm off. So hopefully it will happen as it will. I may also be doing my next channel update during that week off as well, just to let people know how things are going to be progressing with the channel going into the second part of the year. But other than that, yeah, everything is as it is. Big thank you to Overlord once again. Big thank you to all the players for being part of one of the better TOL FALAS battles that I have managed to show off. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.